Okay, here's lesson 11b, and in this lesson you're going to learn how to pull information from the internet. You're going to be reading actual websites. We've got to learn a little bit about what's on a website, and then how to pull it into Python, and then how to put it into a format that's useful to us. So there's an awful lot of code examples in here that will be extremely useful to you when you do your programming assignment. So this is probably a lesson you're going to want to come back to a couple of times. All right, let's get going. Some of you may already know this, and some of you may not have as much experience working with websites. But a website is actually just a text file that's written in the hypertext markup language, or HTML. Now, reading stuff that's written in HTML as a text file is not really intuitive. It's hard to see what's going on. However, we tend not to read those text files directly. We use browsers that know how to interpret the HTML. So maybe you're using Chrome or Safari or Firefox or Opera or Internet Explorer, some internet browser. They read the text files, the HTML files, from the websites, the URLs that you go to, and they put the appropriate text and images on your screen in a way that makes sense to you. You can read these text files in Python, but usually the structure of them is pretty complicated. And to be able to just read a general HTML file and do something with it would be the equivalent of you writing your own browser. That's a pretty big, pretty complicated, pretty long program to write. So this class is not going to teach you the intricacies of HTML, although some of you may already be proficient. Some of you may have written some HTML in websites, or at least modified some, or are able to understand some subset of HTML. Let's take a look at an example. Here is just a subset of the HTML for one page, the page www.google.com. Now, this is not a real complicated website. This website has generally, the website looks like this, and it says Google, and it says enter your search term here. That's about all that's on the page. Here is a subset of the HTML for that page. I did a copy and paste of it, but I cut it off when I filled up an entire page. There's a lot of it. We can pull this information into Python. Knowing what to do with it, that's another story. Now, how do we pull that information into Python? There's a library you can import called urllib.request. And if you put the import statement in, then you can use the functions that are in the urllib.request library. So here I'm going to create a string variable called URL. So I've got a variable called URL, and it contains the string that has the URL for the website I want to go to. If I do urllib.request.url open and pass it the string containing the website I want, www.google.com, or maybe you want to open up GOA.com or ESPN.com, or your own personal homepage, or Facebook, or something like that. You put that URL here in parentheses. What it returns to you is a file-like object that you can read lines from. So what's returned, I'm going to do dot read lines and put the result of this into the variable called lines. At this point, lines is a list variable. Lines is a list, and it's got possibly several elements in it. Each element in the list is a byte stream. More on that on the next page. A byte stream is similar to a string, but we've got to decode it before we can do anything with it. So each element in the list is a byte stream. So maybe I've got 8 byte streams, or 22 byte streams, or 500 byte streams in the variable called lines. Okay? So let's talk about bytes versus strings in Python. A byte stream similar to a string variable, there are some differences. Each element of a string is one character. Okay? The character A, the character for the numeral 3, the character for an O with a funny mark on it, an umlaut that you'd use in a foreign language, a specific smiley, emoticon type thing. Sometimes those characters take only 1 byte to store. Sometimes they take 2 bytes. Sometimes they take more. But each element in a string is just 1 character. Each element of a byte stream is 1 byte long, but it may take more than 1 byte to represent a character. So they're related. Each string can be turned into a byte stream, and each byte stream can be turned into a string if you only knew how to decode those bytes into the appropriate character set. So we're not going to do anything with byte streams in this class at all, except convert them into strings, which we know how to use. So how do we do that? If you have a byte stream, you use the decode function to convert it into a string object. The decode function requires you to tell it which character set you're using. The most common, and the one we'll use in this class, and the one that's the default on all the web pages you're going to use, which is why we're going to use it in this class, is UTF-8. Unicode characters, the version 8 of them. There's also a UTF-16 and a UTF-32. But we'll use UTF-8. Now, how do we do that? Here's our previous example, and I'm going to extend it. We do the import of the library URL lib.request. Then we set up our string variable that has the name of the website we're going to go to. Notice I have to put the full name. I can't just default to google.com like you can in your browsers, because your browsers are filling it in. I need the http:// and then www.google.com. Here's the statement that we ended with on our previous example. Lines equals URL lib.request.url open, passing it the URL. That gives me back a file-like object that I do a read lines on. So at this point, lines is a list of byte streams. Now I'm going to convert each element in the list to a string. So I'm going to create a variable called list of strings, and I'm going to make that be an empty list. Then I'm going to go through a for loop for each line in lines. So I'm taking this, which is a list, taking one element of it at a time. So the first time through this loop, line will have whatever's in line square bracket 0. And the second time through, it'll have whatever's in line square bracket 1, and so on. Now that I've got just one line, which is a byte stream, in the variable line, I'm going to say list of strings.append. So I'm taking this empty list and I'm adding something to it. What am I adding? Line.decode UTF-8. And it looks like there's a syntax error. I'll need one more parenthesis. One parenthesis to close the decode, one to close the append. Okay, so I've got list of strings.append line.decode UTF-8. Now at the end of this, list of strings has maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 10, maybe 50 elements in it, each one of which is a string variable. And we know how to work with string variables. So, what are we going to do with these string variables? What are we going to do with the HTML text? The answer, not very satisfyingly, is it all depends. If you know the structure of the web page, and you know it won't change from the time you wrote your program till the time somebody's running the program, and you can pick your way through all of that HTML, maybe to find the one value on that page that you need. Maybe you're trying to go through a bunch of websites to find the best price on buying a video game that you're interested in. And you happen to know exactly how the 20 websites you're going to look at store that information. You could just pick through all of those strings and find what you needed. Then just manipulate the list of strings you've received and decoded like you would any other set of strings in Python. Really tough. And people change their websites without asking your permission. And your program that worked today might not work tomorrow. Now, some websites provide specialized HTML pages that are not designed for people to look at in their web browser. They're designed for people to read from a program. They're designed to put things in well-known formats that have the data completely identified so that a program can interpret the data. This type of schema for a web page is called an application program interface, or an API, and a lot of websites have APIs. We're going to use just one this week in our examples and in your programming assignment from Google Finance. So, now, what is the special format they use? I don't know if any of you have come across this acronym before, JSON, J-S-O-N. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation. In many APIs, what you want the website to return to you is an object that contains specific fields. But since the web page is a text file, not a binary file, we can't just put an object, like a pickle, on a web page. The web page has to have text. So we've got to somehow take that object that we might have stored as a binary pickle if we knew we were just using Python. We've got to store it as text and then decode it and turn it back into an object. One way to do this, and a way that's pretty standard on the web, is to use JavaScript object notation. It's really, really similar to what a dict is in Python. There's some syntax differences, but it's very, very similar to a dictionary in Python. It's got a name of a field, a colon, a value for that field. A name of a field, a colon, a value for that field, and so on. So we're going to take JSON objects, which are text strings, and turn them into Python dictionaries. So, how do we do that? We aren't going to concern ourselves with all the syntax of JSON, just what we need to convert it to a Python dictionary. There is a library in Python called JSON that has a function in it called json.loads. That stands for loading a string. It loads a string representation of a JSON object, which is pretty much what we're going to be getting from our website, and it returns it as a Python dictionary. Let's see an example on the next page. This continues the code we had before. Now, let's assume that the list of strings has already been created. Remember, we had that for loop that created it. Now, I don't want all of my JSON text to be one element of a list, another element of a list, another element of a list, and so on. I need to have it all merged into one string. And there's a couple of parts of what's going to be on my website that I don't want to include when I merge it all together. So I'm going to start by saying, let's make the variable merged string start out as a string that has nothing in it. Then go through a for loop. For each string in my list of strings, I'm going to check, as long as the string is not in this tuple. Remember, parentheses with values in it separated by commas are tuples, collections of values that can't be changed. Here's the first element of that tuple. Here's the second element of that tuple. If the string isn't one of those, so if the string doesn't consist of / space bracket, or it doesn't consist of just the closing bracket, as long as it's not one of those, maybe we had something that our list of strings has this in the first line, then it's got some data here, then it's got some data here, then it's got some data here, then it's got this closing. And in fact, that is what the Google Finance site returns. I'm going to say, I don't want this part, I don't want this part. All the rest, I'm just going to do plus equals to the merged string, which means concatenate it onto the end. So my merged string gets this part, then it gets this part, then it gets this part. Then the loop is done. I import the JSON library, and now I'm going to create the variable that I want to be using. My dictionary equals json.loads, load the string from the merged string that I built. So you're going to use code almost exactly like this in your program.